This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, Dana L. Davis, is a published novelist and accomplished actress who made her film debut in Coach Carter with Samuel L. Jackson. She's appeared as a series regular on such TV shows as TNT's Franklin and Bash, on which she played Carmen Phillips, and NBC's cult series Heroes, on which she played modern-day mimic Monica Dawson. Dana currently stars on the animated TV series Star vs. the Forces of Evil, Craig of the Creek, and She-Ra. She's also guest starred in over 20 primetime series, including 911, Scorpion, Code Black, Grey's Anatomy, and CSI. Incredibly versatile, Dana is a screenwriter and a trained violist with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Music from Loyola Marymount University. She's also written 2 novels, Tiffany Sly Lives Here Now, which I've read and can tell you is outstanding, and The Voice in My Head, which is due to be released on May 27, 2019. Beyond her work on both the screen and the page, Dana volunteers for nonprofits like Empowering Lives International, an organization which provides training, resources, and encouragement to underprivileged East African children. Dana also created her own nonprofit, Culture for Kids LA, an organization which gifts inner-city children tickets and transportation to see performing art shows around the Los Angeles area. Dana is also a motivational speaker for teens. Her stirring assemblies empower and encourage youth, helping them to redefine what it means to win and lose. So for all of those reasons and many more, it is a truly great honor for me to have the extremely talented Dana L. Davis as my guest on StoryBeat today. Dana, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to chat with you.
So my first question is when do you find time to eat?
I eat in the car usually. No, I'm kidding.
Where did all this artistic expression begin? At what age did you start to think of yourself as an actor, a writer, and so on? When did all this start?
You know, it was really early in my life. I was my mom and dad's last born,
okay.
And so I was very different from the first 2 kids, and I was always sort of wanting to get involved in things, and I think they were really challenged, like, what do we do with this kid who's, like, not okay with what we did with the other 2 kids? Like, what do we do here? And so my mom got this idea. She was like, I would think I was, like, 6, maybe 6 or 7, and we had this theater group in my city called Showtime Pal. And so Showtime Pal put on shows, and my mom was like, oh, I know, I'll get Dana, like, a season pass to Showtime Pal, and we'll just go watch shows. So
right.
We did. We went to this theater, and it started off with, like, this crazy clown, and she would come out, and she'd be like, hi, boys and girls. And then after the clown's interaction, there would be a play. And I just remember being, like, 6 or 7 and being like, what can I do to get up on that stage? And, of course, like, just being the kind of kid that I was, it was never, like, good enough. So I was like, Mom, thank you for taking me to this, but, like, how can I get on the stage? Like, how do we get behind the scenes of this? And so she did her research, and I joined this, like, junior theater at, like, 7 years old. And I'll never forget the experience of, like, being in my first, like, theater class and, like, the teacher having kids come up to read and thinking in my head, like, no, they're not doing it right. That's not how this person would do it. This is how they would say it. And I just was like, I just always felt like that's where I thrived. Like, I felt really like I connected to other characters. And so I just continued to pursue it. Like from that age, from 7 and up until I graduated from high school, I pursued theater in my local city. It was just like something that meant everything to me, and I kind of just knew. I was like, I'm moving to California. In fact, I would tell my mom all the time, like, let's move. Like, I would be 10, 11, and be like, can we move now? And it just never happened because my mom is, she ran a business and worked, and she was just like, wait till you're 18. And that's what I did when I was 18. It was just like a no-brainer. I was gone to California.
So being in front of people was like being at home for you. It was comfortable.
It was comfortable, and I felt like I thrived at it, I felt like it was something that I could do well, and so I gravitated toward it.
So at what point in all of this, I mean, are you trained as an actor too? Did you go to school for that?
I didn't study acting so much in college. I mean, initially I wanted to be a double major, but the music curriculum was so challenging that I ended up just majoring in music.
I'm sure that it was challenging because it's nothing as rigorous as learning an instrument. So at what point did you think to yourself, at what stage did you think to yourself, you know what, I am really good at this. I really should be a professional. Was that from early on, or did it take a while?
I would say it was probably like right away. Like I started doing theater when I was 6 or 7. And then maybe somewhere around the age of 10, I got the idea that people can do this for a living, and I started looking through the newspapers. We lived like 2 hours outside of Chicago, and so I would somehow get like these newspapers from Chicago, and I would say, Mom, look, they're auditioning for Sesame Street. Like, let's go to Chicago. Like, I started to get this idea that I could do this as my job.
So, okay, so now that's quite obvious. Kids at a young age often think to themselves, I want to be playing around with that. Now, you took it to the next level, clearly. But what point did you think to yourself, I want to write as well?
I think that started early on, too, because for me, it's all storytelling, right?
It is.
And I just remember, like, being so captivated by movies and them moving me so much, even as a kid, and writing. I was the kind of kid who kept a journal. I always tell people about this story when I think I was maybe 8 or 9, and we had an Earth Day project in school, and we could do anything we wanted for the Earth Day project.
Right.
And so I asked my teacher, I was like, hey, can I write a play? And I'll never forget his face. He was like, sure. Like, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that.
How old were you? How old were you at that point?
What was that?
How old were you at that point?
I think I was probably about 9 or 10.
So that would have shocked the teacher, because probably never heard that before.
I'm sure he'd never heard that before. And he said, okay. And so I wrote an Earth Day play about a king and queen whose kingdom was completely covered in like trash and dirt. And I cast it with kids in the class, and we performed this play. And so writing has always been really important to me too. I've been the kind of person who kind of focuses on one thing. So when I moved to California, I was just like, okay, I'm going to focus first on my acting, and then wait for that moment to sort of, move into writing as well. But they were always sort of concurrently like passions of mine.
How has the acting and the writing overlapped one another? In other words, you write characters, but you also play characters. How do those overlap for you?
Well, I think in some ways it's given me a newfound respect. I think like for the screenwriters, and I think that when I was younger and I was on set, I'd come on set and maybe even almost be oblivious to the fact that, there's this team of writers who've created this character that you're playing. And so now that I've sort of begun my second career as a writer, mostly it's given me a newfound respect for screenwriters and all that they do to create these these scripts. And I guess that's really the only way that it's overlapped, is just giving me a respect for what they do, and I connect more to the words because I realize it comes from a truly authentic place.
Right.
It doesn't just magically materialize in front of you, which is what I think maybe I thought before.
Do you when you get a script, do you work on it in a similar way to when you think about writing a new character, or is it a totally different process?
I think the processes are definitely similar. When I create a character, when I'm writing, I start really from scratch. Like, I'm like, what kind of music does this character listen to?
Right.
What are their quirks? When they're, driving or walking, what are they thinking? Like, what are their random thoughts? Like, I really go deep when I'm creating my characters.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's obvious from Tiffany Sly, by the way. That's very obvious.
Oh, thank you so much. So when I'm reading a script and I'm auditioning for a part, or I've already booked a part, I do something similar. Even if it's not there on the page, I do that in order to bring the character to life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so you watched a lot of movies and TV, I assume, and that's part of what drove you to do this. You've
Definitely.
You said that already, and I'm curious, were there any particular shows or movies that had the most influence on you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the movies that had a really huge impact on me as a kid was And Justice for All,
right?
Starring Al Pacino.
Sure.
And even to this day, like when I watch that movie, and I do probably watch it like once a year because I just find it to be such a masterpiece. I get like teary and I get like just like emotional. I mean, I just feel like Al Pacino did such a wonderful job of bringing that character to life and that passion for other people. And I just remember being inspired as a kid. I was just like, how can he do this? Like, how can he make me feel this way? And I just remember wanting to make other people feel that way. Like, I wanted to make other people feel, if that makes any sense.
It does.
I just was like, yeah. And so he really inspired me. Like, and I think that now this next movie I'm going to say is a little bit strange,
mm-hmm.
but it's a movie called New Jack City.
New Jack City, sure.
Yeah, starring Wesley Snipes. And that was another movie that made me feel.
Directed by Ernest Dickerson.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
See? It made me feel, because I had, a different kind of a lifestyle. Like, I grew up listening to Les Mis and playing my viola.
Right.
And listening to musical theater. And so watching this movie and being exposed to, like, this lifestyle, I was captivated by it. And, of course, I knew as a kid, I was like, I know that this is a story that someone created, but I know that they created it based on experiences and things that are really happening in the world. And it just was, like, heartbreaking, and it was eye-opening. And, again, I was just like, I want to be a part of this I want to share stories, too. I just was so amazed by the way that I felt, and I wanted other people to be able to feel as well.
So
to be able to, like, have.
I was going to say, I think you've hit on the magic formula for most people that are trying to figure out how to succeed, and I think you've hit on it in several different ways. The big one being it's about emotion. We're in the passion business. We sell passion. We don't sell intellectuality, though you've got to be pretty intellectual to do what you do. But we sell emotion, and that's what hooked you, I assume.
Absolutely, because I think that we get into, like, a way of life. Like, we go to the store, we go to school, and we get into a routine, and we get used to feeling a certain way and having a certain type of a life. And then we read a book or watch a movie, and we feel a different way, and we're like, it's like a jolt of caffeine. It's like you just had, like, 10 cups of coffee, and you're like, oh my goodness, it's like, it's so nice to be able to hop on a flight and go to Italy, but sometimes we can't do that. And so when we have movies and we have books, we get to have these experiences in the comfort of our own home.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it's that passion that gets ignited.
It's true in most of the arts, especially true in movies and TV, where an audience can be transported to a place visually and audio wise, without ever having to go. Now, in a book, you get to go there in your mind's eye, which is a little bit different. The audience is part of the process, of the readership is part of the process, as opposed to on stage or on a movie where it's sort of laid out for you somewhat by being visually in front of you. But what you're
Yes.
doing as a writer is you're creating a scenario in which the reader has to participate in your world. And I think there's great power in that.
I think that's so well said.
Let's talk about writing novels, which I think is something that you do extremely well. Let's talk about the big challenges of conceiving and writing a novel, which is a big work. What are the challenges that you faced when you started your first book?
Well, I think the challenges are, like, for screenwriting, for example, or reading a script, like, all of the little intricacies of a person's thoughts and feelings aren't really there, you know? It's just like, you know, you start off the script with, like, interior bathroom morning. You know, a young girl is getting ready for school.
Right.
And then it's basically dialogue, and then you jump to, like, the next scene. Whereas when you're writing a book, you have to go deeper, you know? A young girl's getting ready for school. What is she thinking? What is she feeling? What steps does she take? You know, it's every page is so full. And that was such a challenge for me because you start off with an idea. Like for Tiffany Sly, it started off as an idea. I was like, hey, I want to explore trauma with a young audience. What happens to the human heart and mind after life breaks your heart? What happens after that? And that's where I started. And then I was like, oh, I have so much to fill on these pages. And so I think that's challenging for any author. Sure, anyone who even wants to be a writer. You have a great idea. You have a story, but it's just like filling those pages, you know, is challenging.
You, on paper, you're creating the scenery. You're creating the people. You're creating the smells and the emotions. Whereas, again, something on screen is maybe a little bit easier to concoct, I guess would be a good word, because there's this imagery laid out for you. It requires a production designer to make the scenery. But you have to sit there and create the whole world.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
and I think that's the mark of a great writer, when a person reads those words and they feel it all. And they're like, I feel all of this.
I think you're right. I think that is the hallmark of a great writer. Do you write every day?
I do, absolutely. I write every day. It's just, it's like my cup of coffee. Like if I'm not writing every day, I don't feel whole. I feel like really disconnected.
Do you have a set time when you write? Is it morning or afternoon or evening or something like that?
Well, you know, I have a little one, and I've been really open with our journey, which is that my daughter is autistic. She's high-functioning autistic. And so I pretty much write around her schedule. So when she was a baby, I would write when she slept, which was, you know, she would go to sleep for an hour, and I would write. I mean, it would be 2 o'clock in the morning, and she'd finally go to sleep, and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to start writing. Now that we have a little bit of a better schedule with her, like she's in school, as soon as she gets on that morning bus, my laptop is open, and I'm writing. So, and also I have to balance a lot. So I have to balance my writing life with my acting life.
Of course.
So that sometimes gets in the way. But typically, as soon as my daughter gets on the bus and I wave it like bye, I open up the laptop.
Are you able to write when you're working on a production?
Yes, and that's the amazing thing about being an actor, because there's so much downtime.
Of course.
So much downtime. And, you know, as a young 20-year-old, when I'd be on set, there'd be so much downtime, and it would all be about social, like, yay, let's hang out and let's talk. And so now it's like, oh, we have an hour until this next scene is set up. I'll be in my trailer. So I get to go to my trailer and work.
Are people on set kind of in awe of what you're doing?
I think there's so much going on a set that it's really hard for anyone to hyper-focus on you. Like, everyone is so busy. I mean, there's literally hundreds of people on a set. So it's like going to Disneyland. You know, it's so much going on that no one knows what you're doing, or, you know, everyone's so, you know, in their own world.
So I think that's And we can talk a little bit more about set life in a bit, but I want to continue on with the writing world because I think it's interesting that you're able to bridge both. I can tell that you're in both worlds. I can tell that you're a people watcher. You have to be as observant as you are to be able to do what you're doing. In both worlds, you have to be able to be a people observer, in a people watcher, in as an actor and also as a writer. Do you find that it gets difficult sometimes to watch people if they know who you are?
Well, I think I camouflage easily because I don't oftentimes, have those kinds of experiences
That's
where
good.
people are like, "Hey, aren't you Dana Davis?" And I also watch people just in my interactions with them every day because, like, my friends always say, "Dana, you're such a good listener," and I oftentimes want to admit I'm actually taking notes on you. Like I'm studying you. So I am a good listener because I'm always observing people. And you're so right. Like I enjoy it. Like when I'm at the airport and I'm sitting there, and there's a family next to me, I'm so like enraptured with their interaction, and I'm constantly building characters, based on my own experiences in life, because I just find people so fascinating, and I enjoy people. I love people, So I think to be a good writer, you really have to have a love for humankind. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Oh, you better, or you've got a problem, I think.
Yeah.
Do you have any special techniques when you're watching folks? Is there anything you do when you want to observe something and maybe it's a little too obvious? Do you have any tricks or anything?
Yeah. I think that we're in a new era of smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
So scrolling is always like a good way to like tune in to people, because and I do think too that we're in a new culture where people are really hyper focused on themselves, and I'm trying to say it politically correct because I don't want to say like everyone's just like not thinking about you, like that's kind of like our new culture, and so it's easier to observe in 2019 than it was when I was younger, like, in the late 90s or early 2000s, because no one was staring at their phones, and everyone, I think we just had a different kind of society. Like, we connected more, whereas now we're kind of disconnected from the people around us now, and so it does make observing a lot easier.
I find that to be kind of sad in a way, because I'm far from being a kid, and I can remember when nobody was looking at their phone, and it was... I think we were a better society for it, but that's a discussion for a different day.
Definitely, and I would have to agree with you. It's kind of heartbreaking, actually, but yeah, I understand that's a long discussion in itself.
So let's talk about your upcoming book, The Voice in My Head. What's that all about? Can you give us a sort of a synopsis of it?
Sure. Okay, so The Voice in My Head is about a young girl named Indigo Phillips, who is 18 years old. And she's also an identical twin. So Indigo's sister, whose name is Violet, is terminally ill, and she is opting for medically assisted death.
Mm.
And so on the eve of this event, Indigo starts to hear a voice in her head that's claiming to be the voice of God. And the voice is saying that if you take your sick sister to this remote rock formation in the Arizona desert, she will live. And so the book sort of takes a turn and becomes this family road trip with like 10 people stuffed on a paratransit bus traveling cross country to save this young girl's life. Wow.
And what happens? Or should you not tell us?
Well, yeah, you got to get the book.
You got to get the book. That's what we got to do. Where did that idea come from? How did you come to that?
Well, this idea came to me because, as I said before, my daughter is autistic.
Yes.
And it was a really rough transition. Before I had my daughter, I was a very successful actress. I was doing shows like Heroes and The Nine and Coach Carter and Prom Night, and I really was on track to break out and, be a super successful actress. And that was sort of the path that I was on.
I assume that was most of your daily thought and activity, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then I had my little one, And right away, I knew that there were problems. I knew that things weren't 100% right with her. And so I had to make a choice, you know. I knew that my daughter was in her early development years, and I knew that she needed me. I knew that no one was going to be able to help guide her except for me. And so I made the choice to take some time away from my acting career and focus on my daughter. And now doing that put me in sort of a crisis. Like, I was in a financial crisis. I was in an emotional crisis because I didn't know a thing about autism. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like learning as I went along.
Oh, sure.
And I found myself like sort of at rock bottom. I had lost, over the course of the years of helping my daughter and stepping away from my career, I lost, you know, everything. I lost money, my savings. Well, we lost our home that I owned in Los Angeles. We ended up having to move in with family members. I think at my lowest point, I looked at my bank account and I had negative $300.
Ooh.
And I was like, this is bad, but I'm still on course. I'm still on course to help my daughter. And this is just, I was just so passionate, and so I had so much hope, even in a hopeless situation. And so what happened, I remember I had a book on submission because I was writing too, you know, so I was writing this book. Tiffany Sly Lives Here Now was the book that I was writing. And at this time, this low point in my life, like, we're living in this place that we're getting ready to have to pack up and move out. I can't afford, you know, the mortgage. And I have a book on submission. And we get from my book agent, we submit it to about 3 publishers. And right away, the 3 publishers get back to us. And so my agent kind of calls me. He's like, we have 3 requests for you to rewrite and resubmit your book. Now, if you're not in the book industry, you don't really know what that means.
Right.
It's a really good thing.
Yes.
It means that these editors love your book, but they want you to make some changes. And now, even though it's a good thing, it's a huge request because they're basically saying, can you rewrite this whole thing? and we're not promising you we're going to buy it.
And nothing
we just want you to rewrite it. And what's that? Wait, what was that?
I was going to say nothing to it.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And when you finish rewriting it, we might maybe buy this. And so it's a tough situation, but it's an awesome situation. So I get this phone call. Now, I'm rock bottom. I have no money, and my daughter is struggling. I'm struggling, and it's just a rough time. And I just remember thinking and even saying to my agent, I can't do that. I'm not in a position to rewrite this book. I don't have it in me, and I'm sorry. And my agent was like, okay, well, we'll just, you know, kind of pause it. We'll take the book off submission because clearly it needs some changes, and we'll just kind of be here for a second. And so I just remember being in this point that was such a low point for me, and I believe in a higher power. So I remember my mom took my daughter for the weekend, and she was like, maybe you just need a weekend off, you know, some time to yourself. And so I remember being home alone and crying out to my higher power. And I just remember being like, when are you going to help me? When are you going to make things better? And, like, I just remember feeling so emotional and so, like, please, God, like, help me. And I just remember hearing this voice. Now, it wasn't an audible voice, but it was a voice that wasn't mine. There was something in me that was speaking to me that said, like, very simply, Dana, get off your knees and rewrite your book. And it was just so clear, and it made me stop crying, and it made me refocus. And that weekend that my mom took my daughter, I pulled out my laptop and I started rewriting Tiffany Sly Lives Here Now. And I sold the book 6 months later.
Wow.
And it was such a turning point for me. You know, I started working on different animation shows, and I got back on TV. I started recurring on a show on CBS called Scorpion. And I started making peace with my new reality. I was like, my daughter's autistic, and I'm okay with that. In fact, I love it. This is our life. And so I got the idea for the voice in my head because I was like, what does it mean to truly live? Like, should we compare ourselves to others, or should we take what we have and try to make the best of it? And that was the turning point for me. When I heard that voice that spoke to me that said, hey, Dana, get up off your knees and rewrite your book, I made peace with my new reality. And so that's really what the book is all about. It's about making peace with your reality and working hard to live the best life that you have to live.
I love the fact that you, both of your books come from a thematic place, and that there's a purpose to each of the books. I think that's a really fabulous thing. Do you feel like many artists do, that you are a conduit for the work? Many artists will say, the idea or the work came to me as a bolt out of the blue, or someone was speaking through me, or something of that nature. Do you feel the same way, that you're a conduit for the work rather than the source of the work?
Well, I don't know. I think sometimes it's a combination of both for me. It's like being an actor and, having to play a certain part. I think you can't play that part if you're not personally, in some way, not completely, had some sort of connection with it.
I agree.
Like, for example, when I watch parents on screen, like playing a mom or a dad,
Mm-hmm.
I can always tell if that person is an actual parent. I just can tell, And sometimes they do okay performances when they're not parents, but when they're parents, it's so authentic and it's so believable and it's so amazing and it's like, wow, So I say that to say that I think it's a combination of both. I think that sometimes you do have to have a personal experience to be able to effectively, bring the story to life. Not 100%, but you have to be connected to it in some way.
But you also, you were on a show called Heroes, in which you were capable of doing superhuman things, and that's not who you are, but you had to connect anyway.
Yeah, because, what's the definition of being a hero and doing superhuman things? You know what I mean? It's all perspective, and so that was really actually quite easy to connect to.
Well, so there you go. Do you usually work from an outline? Do you outline?
Well, Tiffany Sly was a book that went through lots of changes because of, as I just told you, requests from editors.
Of course.
So that book did not come from an outline. That just came from an idea of me being like, how do I present trauma? How do I talk about anxiety? How do I talk about life after pain? But the voice in my head and my books since do come from very detailed outlines.
Mm-hmm. Your first book, Tiffany Sly, you wrote and wrote and wrote. You didn't try to figure it out ahead of time. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
And then you wound up with a publishing house saying, if only you'd make these changes. So you had to step back from that and try it a slightly different way. Is that right?
Absolutely. And now I sort of like dot all my I's and cross all my T's, because when I'm finished with my outline, I present it to multiple people before I even start writing, because that was a lot of work. Like rewriting Tiffany Sly was a lot of work. And so now we look at the detailed outline before I start writing.
I think that's... I've been a believer most of my career in outlines. I talk to writers on this show and in life, not frequently, but now and then, who don't outline at all. And I'm kind of in awe of that when you're able to do that. So in a way, I think I'm glad to hear that you've come to that, because I believe that's how you are able to sort of save a lot of time. It's, as you know, difficult to write an entire novel and then have someone say, nope, you just got to do this and this and you have to rewrite it. That's hard.
Exactly. And in the writing world, we call it plotting or pantsing. And plotting is writing outlines, and pantsing is just like,
by the seat of your pants.
Coming up with it on the fly.
Yeah.
And I really feel like they're one and the same. But if you're a pantser, I feel like you're doing your outlines. It's just taking you a lot more time. You're writing your whole book, and then you're rewriting it.
Well, so I think that's right. I think that very few writers who write, as you say it by pantsing, which I love that term. That's great. I think very few writers who are pants writers don't already have a good idea of what they want the outcome to be. They may not have any of the detail in mind, but the outcome is probably there. They're not just starting in a place and hoping they'll get to an end. I think they have a clue. What for you, when you're either writing or reading or on a show, what for you makes a good story good? Wow. A big question.
I think that if you can change my perspective,
Mm-hmm.
then then I would say that it's a story that's good. Like, and that's why I think about the Al Pacino movie and Justice for All, because I was a smart kid, you know. So when I was younger, I maybe I didn't have a lot of respect for lawyers, because I thought of them as like prosecuting attorneys who are mean. Like, that's sort of what I thought of like lawyers. And when I watched that movie, I felt shamed. I was like, this is an amazing profession, and I'm in awe of like what they do, and I became changed. I was like converted after watching that. And I feel like even with New Jack City, I became converted, because it's so easy to look judgmentally at a culture and say, oh, if you do drugs, you're a bad person. Well, I watched that movie and I was like, I saw a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so I no longer had a judgmental thought about, you know, violent communities or drug communities. So yeah, if you can change my mind, then I feel like that's a sign of something that's really good.
So I think to change an audience's mind, we've already hit on this a little bit. I think that it's really just terrific that you have a thematic purpose, that you use. So when you say the book is about X and it's more thematic than it's about a character specific, that's a really good thing, because then you can change people's minds. You've taken a perspective.
Exactly, which is why we should plot. Writers, we need to plot, because we need to say, what do I want to do? What is my goal here? I think it's important.
I think that is 100% true. So, okay, aside from coming to the point where you realize outlining was good, are there other things that you've learned from writing your first book, Tiffany Sly, that you've applied to your second book that you now know that you would never do again? Is there anything else like outlining?
I think it's important to read.
Well, that's for sure.
I think that as writers, we can become so immersed in what we're doing that we forget to check in. So I think that's really important. And I think when I was writing Tiffany Sly, I was so immersed in like trying to make this book work that I was disconnected from what was being, you know, what was out, what was hot, what people were connecting to.
You stopped reading.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are lots of novelists that say they can't read while they're writing, but you say that you should read while you're writing.
I think you should, even if it's a page, even if it's a chapter. I think you should check in, especially to, and I say this with caution, because sometimes what's hot doesn't mean it's good.
Sure, of course.
But I think you should check into what people are really reading, like what's the hot books, because it kind of shows you the climate and what people are gravitating towards. And not that it's going to affect what you're writing, but it can also help you shape your themes. And I just think it can be used as a guide. So I think I did that differently with The Voice in My Head. I checked in more with young adult authors and what they were writing, and that was really helpful for me.
That's great. What would you say are a few things that you have done that other writers might need to do in order to secure a publishing? Is there anything that you think that's important?
Yes, absolutely. I think the thing that stands out to me is authentic dialogue. I think that there is a great falling away from like the old way of speaking. We have a more conversational way of speaking, and I think that when we add that to what we're writing, it just makes the work stand out. And I think that's something that I do well. I think the conversations, my dialogue, is really authentic, and I really just get it from listening. You know, I listen to people. I speak my dialogue out loud. I want to make sure that this is a real conversation. You know, this is something you could just actually hear. You know, when you're out. You know, and you're listening to a mother and daughter talking, or a mother and father talking. So I do think that we as writers need to, kind of evolve with the times. I think we're all doing it, but our dialogue is becoming it's a different way. It's a different way of connecting and speaking, and I think that's important to make a work stand out.
Well, I can tell you from having just read Tiffany Sly, that you definitely have an ear for dialogue. There's no question about that. And you have an ear for very passionate and emotional dialogue, because there are quite a few scenes that are really intense in that book. And I was drawn into them very deeply. So I think that's a sign of someone who does have an ear for dialogue.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Oh, my pleasure. So I know that as both, working in the acting business and also as a writer, you've received your fair share of notes from people. Both you already went through having to rewrite a whole book, but you've also received notes on sets, no doubt, from directors and others. Do you have a particular thought or technique about taking notes and how you deal with notes?
Yeah, I think that it can be challenging, especially when you're on set and you're getting a note from a director. That's a little bit easier because you are bringing someone else's vision to life.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is, a part of you as a performer that sort of has to acquiesce to what, their vision is. And maybe you can even, meet somewhere in the middle. But for the most part, you're bringing someone else's vision to life.
Sure.
And so it's easier to take notes on a set. As a writer, you are the vision. It's your vision. And so when someone says, well, this is what I think, it's really challenging.
You're a little more protective.
Oh, absolutely. I think that any author, when you go through the stages of editing, nothing makes you more angry. When you get those those edits, those line edits, and the big edit letter, sometimes you want to scream because you're like, no, that's not what I want to do. So it takes some time. I think it's so good that edits aren't given in person, because a writer really needs time to sit with the edits and think about it.
Oh yes.
And
oh yes.
Yeah. You know.
So. I do know. But you see, in TV, have you written any screenplays or teleplays that have been produced? Has that happened for you yet?
No.
Okay,
no.
so it will. I have no doubt of it. You're going to write screenplays that are going to get produced. But when you're in television, you, the writer, are rarely in charge of anything unless you're the one of the main producers. And then you're in charge of a whole lot of stuff. But as a writer, because I was a freelance writer my entire career, as a freelance writer, you're constantly being rewritten. And you must get to a point somewhere along that line as the writer where you have to give in to that and not let it bother you, or you would go nuts. So as a novelist, it is a totally different thing. It's like telling Picasso, no, you got to change that blue to purple. That makes no sense. So it is different. I think that you already know from working on sets that they make changes all the time, right up through a take. They'll make a change.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
You have to be willing to bend there. But like you say, they're talking about your essentially one of your children when you've written something that's from your heart like that. Do you think of your books as one of your children? Do you think of them that way?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we call them. I have a little writing community that I'm a part of, and we basically call them our book babies.
Our book babies.
That's what they are. They feel like our little babies that we gave birth to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And when you have many of those, sometimes, at least in my case, sometimes you forget they were there until somebody reminds you. And in other cases, they're quite loud and you can't ignore them. But in other words, notes for you are easy on a set because it's somebody else's gig. But the book is yours, so you take it much more personally.
Absolutely. But I think, too, that we're dealing with professionals, and we're dealing with people who have been in the book industry for years, decades. And so their input is extremely valuable.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And we just have to find a way to come to some sort of agreement. And sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're wrong. And so you just have to know when to pick your battles, because sometimes it's going to be a battle, and, that's just the way that it is.
Well, I like the fact that you said it's good for a writer to get the written notes so that you can spend some time thinking about it. I think that one of the techniques that I teach my students in terms of taking notes is take the notes, whatever they are. take them, write them down, and think about them, even when you know they're wildly wrong and you disagree, because sometimes by thinking about them, you'll realize that the person that's giving you the note had a point about something, and you can make a big difference. You can make a change. Do you find that too, or has that not worked for you that way with the books?
I 1,000% agree with you. I mean, every book that is sent in to an editor has to go through a round of edits, based on that initial edit letter that
Absolutely.
the editor sends to you. And every book is better afterwards. I mean, that's just the way that it is. So,
Right.
yeah, I think that you sit with those notes and you take them. I mean, and essentially, like I said, we're coming to an agreement, but some of it is going to be so helpful and it's going to make your work really stand out.
All right, so I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the process of being an actor. So when you go to get a series regular job, like on Franklin and Bash or Heroes, what is that process like, and how does it differ from going to audition for a single episode or doesn't?
Well, in some ways it's similar. I think it's just more. There's a lot more auditions. For example, if you're auditioning for a series, there might be the initial audition with the casting director, and then there might be a second audition with producers and director, and then there might be even a third audition there, and then following that there'll be a screen test where they will record you. And things have changed a lot in the past 10 years. So screen testing used to happen in front of the studio and the network. So you would go into Disney, for example,
Right.
and you would go into an office, and there would be 30, 40 people in there, all the network executives,
Yeah.
and you would basically perform like a play. It's changed because we're in a digital age, and so now it's sort of professionally recorded, and then that video is, shared with the network executives instead of like you having to actually be there. It's your video that's shared. It's the same thing, basically. And so that's sort of how it differs from, like, if you're auditioning for, like, a guest spot on a show, you might audition once, and then they'll hire you off the tape.
Right.
Whereas if you're auditioning for a series regular, it's there's a lot more auditions. There's a screen test. There's a network test. There's so many different stages before you're actually brought on to the cast.
There's a different level of investment in you from their side on a regular part.
Yes, absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you have a particular philosophy or point of view on auditioning? Do you have a way that you think of it or go about it?
Yeah, I think that you have to, as the actor, I like to think of, like, being an actor like you're a machinist. Like, you are, like, in control of this machine.
Oh,
and
nice.
you have to know what you're capable of. Like, all machines can't do everything. So I think the sign of a great actor and how to really do great auditions is to make sure that you're stepping into rooms where you know that you know how to man the machine. And if you can't, don't go to the audition. I am the kind of actor who passes on a lot of auditions because I know that I'm not going to be able to authentically portray this role. I might even go in there thinking, I can do a good audition, but I don't think that this is the role for me to play. And I think that so many actors exhaust themselves by going to audition after audition that they're not really right for because there's sort of like a desperation in it because, look, there's no job security in Hollywood. So you're just like, oh, I have an audition? Oh, okay, I'm going to go to it. And I think that's a mistake. So I think one of the things that I do is I step into rooms knowing that this is a part that I can actually portray, that I can give my all to. And it just gives me confidence, and I'm able to do a great job. Instead of going into a room where I'm like, I don't even, know anything about this, but I'm going to try. Then you're performing, and it's not really authentic. So I guess that's sort of what I would say.
Do you get there by sheer gut intuition, or is there something that you are able to identify? This part is for me. This part is not for me.
I would have to say it is sheer gut intuition. There's something almost like magical that happens when you read a script and you instantly connect to it. and you're just like, I know this character. I know how to make this character come alive. I know how to breathe life into these words. And then there's other parts where you're like, I'm not connecting to it. Just not connecting to it. Yeah, and I think, too, there's different, like, as a black actress, a lot of times writers, unfortunately, have put us in a box. They put black women in a box, and this is how writers are writing for black women. They're sassy. They're really, really strong.
Yeah.
They're street. There's all these different, stereotypes. And oftentimes that's what comes into my inbox. Lots of times my agents call me and they're like, you have an audition for this stereotype. And those are a lot of the things that I pass on because, for me, it's a narrative that I'm not really excited about. I think sometimes those are important narratives, but it's not something that I really can connect to, and so I'm just going to pass on that, and that's not going to be something that I do. So those are easy to be like, okay, I'm not connecting to this. But, yeah, so I think you just kind of gauge it as you read it, and it's, like I said, it's something magical that happens. You're like, oh, yes, I know this person. No, I don't.
It also sounds to me like you're working very hard not to be pigeonholed, which I think is good.
Yeah, and I think that comes from just not being desperate, and I think that comes from, like, life experience. When you're young, at least when I was young, I was just like, I want to do everything. I want to be famous. And then, of course, that you just, like, grow up, and you're like, you get back to, like, why you did this in the first place, which is you're a storyteller, and you want people to feel, and the industry isn't going anywhere, and so you have to know that this part might not be for me, but this part will be for me. And that's hard. I know it comes with, like, time and experience, but I think it's so important, and it makes such a big difference. Like, there's so many actors that I admire, like Daniel Day-Lewis, who is one of my favorite actors, and you just don't see him all the time. He's not in everything,
No.
and that's because he's selective. He doesn't have to be.
He's ultra selective. He's selective, almost like to a craziness, which is what he is. He's just manically into it, and that's what makes him as great as he is.
Absolutely. And then when he does finally pick a role, my God, it's amazing. It's, like, so good.
So I had the privilege of having on stage here where I teach at Point Park University, I had the privilege of interviewing Bryan Cranston for an hour. And one of the things we talked about, which I think you'll appreciate, is he long ago in his career gave up feeling horrible about not getting a part because he realized it wasn't his part to have, and that when he gets a part, it is his part, even when he goes after something hard. Well, now it's a lot easier for him, but in the early days when he'd go after something hard and not get it, he would be devastated by it. But then he realized that it wasn't his part to have, and that's how the universe was playing it for him. Does that seem similar to you?
I love that. Yeah, I love that, and I think it's so true. And I think that it's, as artists, we have to sort of support one another. And I think when someone does get a part over you, there's a part of you that has to be, and I know this is hard, but happy for them. Like, wow, I'm so glad that they found their person.
Exactly what he was saying.
To this part.
He was happy for his friends for getting the part that he didn't get because it wasn't his part.
Absolutely. Because when you get the part, you don't want anybody going, that Dana Davis, she got that part. It's like, this is my part to get. And there's just so much content out there that, you don't get this one, you'll get the next one.
Of course.
Yeah.
The only way you don't is by giving up and not going at all. So you just keep going. All right, so let's talk quickly about, if you can do it quickly, when you get a part and you get the script, aside from reading the script, which is obvious, what are the first things you do? How do you then start to work on that role? What are your priorities?
Well, I think I do the same thing as I do when I create characters when I'm writing. Is I break the character down to just such things such as, like, what kind of music they listen to, what kind of food they're eating. If she's having a conversation with her dad, what's the history of this relationship? I want every word to mean something, and that's just how I work as an actor, and that's how I work as a writer too.
Interesting. Do you have? Are there things that directors have done with you, for you, over time that you would like to see more of from directors?
That's a good question. I think that oftentimes on a set, and I'm just going to be honest, there's a lot of pressure on the directors. They have a lot of time constraints.
Sure, especially in TV.
And I think that sometimes the director is really, like, relying on you to, like, bring it, you know, like, it's almost like, okay, I'll give an example. My editor one time, we're working on the final scene in The Voice in My Head, and so she reads it, and she writes me back. She goes, Dana, I want to give you some final notes on the last chapter. And the note was, I know you can do better than this. And I was like, that's my note. I totally get it. I'm going to bring it. Like, that was enough for me. And I think that directors, too, are kind of relying on you. So there's sort of like an unspoken language going on, because it's like, we don't have a lot of time to make this happen. So I'm sort of counting on you. So I guess I wish we had more time, which is like, you know, I wish that there weren't these time constraints and, like, we have to have this done by sundown, or maybe you're working with a kid and the kid can only work until 2 o'clock. And it's like, I remember, like, having countdowns. Like, someone was like, we've got 60 seconds before this kid is, like, cannot work.
Wow.
So more than, like, anything, I wish that sometimes directors and actors had more time together. Sometimes I feel like it's like, they look at you, you look at them, and there's words that aren't spoken, and it's like, you got it, I got it, okay, you're going to do it? Okay, good. Like, it's sort of like that.
What do you have any particular tricks for memorizing lines?
Memorizing lines is a tough one, and I would like to share that because of my anxiety after having my daughter, after dealing with autism. Tiffany is about anxiety, as you know. You've read the book.
Yes, sure.
And it comes from my own experience dealing with anxiety. And one of the things about anxiety is that it does affect your memory. And so when I was younger, memorizing lines was so easy. Once I became immersed in the character, the lines just flowed out of me. And now that I'm dealing or living with anxiety, it's a little bit different. And so I do have to spend a lot of time with the lines. And I would just say that to any, like, aspiring actors, that is so important, to spend that time with those lines, because when you walk into a room and you're auditioning, you really should, for the most part, be off book. You shouldn't be staring down at your page, because they're not really going to be able to get lost in what you're doing.
Of course.
So I think that we should spend those hours memorizing, if it takes you hours. Like me right now, it's taking me hours to memorize lines, whereas before it wouldn't take me so long. But whatever it takes, as long as you get it done, that's really the most important thing.
Is it sometimes just sheer force of will?
Absolutely. I mean, I spend a lot of time commuting. I commute. My daughter goes to school an hour and a half outside of L.A.
Wow.
And so a lot of times in the car, my iPhone app has, you know, the voice app. And so I'll just say the lines on the voice app and just kind of loop it, and it'll just play for an hour and a half as I'm driving back to L.A.
Oh, that's something that when I was a kid you didn't have.
Yeah.
What we used to do is we used to take a cassette recorder and record the other person's line, and then play it back, and try and get at the timing of it. It was challenging.
Yeah, you know what? I still kind of do that too. Like I will record the other lines, and there's like an empty space, and so I can just sort of practice all the way to my destination. That's probably what it is. It's sheer
brute force. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
All right. So you've worked with and met lots of people in the business. Do you have a particular story you might be able to share with us that would be, quirky, weird, oddball, or just plain funny that you can share?
Once I was auditioning for a film, and I really felt like I could connect to this character. She was kind of a bad girl, and I felt connected to that. I was like, I can authentically play this character. So I went into the audition, and I feel like I did a really good job. But then when I got done, I'm in a room with, like, the director, like 3 producers, casting director, the writer. So it's quite a few people in the room. And so when I get done, they're like, Dana, that was so good. Can you do it again? But this time, like, she's rolling a joint. while she's talking.
Yeah.
And they were like, have you ever rolled a joint before? And I was like, quickly like, yes, even though, no, I've never rolled a joint before. And so they're like, okay, great. So do it again. And this time, can you sort of mime rolling a joint? Like go through the whole process of that. And so literally, okay, so imagine your one hand is on the left side of your body, and your other hand is on the right side of your body, and you're twisting. That's what I did. Like I've got one hand over here, one hand over there, and I'm twisting almost like I'm rolling a giant sausage. And I'm just like twisting my hands, twisting, and I'm doing the lines. And that's what I did. I twisted my hands for the next 10 minutes during the whole scene. And I thought that I was rolling a joint. I'm like, that's how people roll joints, right? That's what I'm thinking. So when I got done, it was deathly silent in the room. And I just remember them wide-eyed staring at me, heads nodding, okay. And so when I got done and I walked out of the room, I could sort of hear the laughter as I was walking down the hallway. And I called my friend and I was like, okay, did I do something wrong? And I was like, can I show you how I rolled the joint? And my friend was like, Dana, were you rolling a sausage? He was like, that's not at all how you roll a joint. So I felt so embarrassed. I mean, that embarrassment stayed with me for so long because I was like, I can't believe I rolled a sausage.
I give you credit. I give you credit for saying yes.
I know. If only I could have been like, take a deep breath. Actually, no. I've never rolled a joint.
Yeah, well, that. By the way, I think there's a good lesson in there. I think for actors, you always say yes, unless it's going to put yourself in harm's way where you're going to get hurt. But you always say yes, and then hopefully you get the part, and then you learn how to do that.
Exactly. I love that story. I think Eddie Redmayne tells a story about lying and saying he could ride a horse and then getting on set and he can't ride a horse and the director's screaming over the megaphone, "You're a liar, Eddie."
You just have to say yes. You can't say no. That's the whole point. I think that's great. All right, so do you have one solid piece of advice or a tip for those who are, just starting out, or maybe they've been in a while and they're trying to get to the next level?
I would say find a way, and I know it's hard, to lose that desperation, that you don't have to get this part, and you might not, and that's okay. Have resilience and know that the parts that are right for you are going to come up, and just find a way to fill up the space in your life. Like, for example, I'm a writer. I also do voiceover animation. I'm also a mother. There are so many things that I do that when I get those no's, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go off and do this, or I'm going to do that. I think that sometimes as people in the industry, as actors, we get so caught up and desperate. We want that part. We want it so
definitely.
bad. And I'll never forget, there is this time I went to, my agents called me, and they're like, hey, Dana, you have an audition for, I think it was Cold Case or I can't remember the show, but they're like, you have an audition, and they want to see you today. And I was like, I can't go today because I had just taken out, my extensions, and my hair was in a giant afro. And I was like, my hair is in an afro. I look a mess. I'm not going in looking like this. Sorry, I passed on this audition. And they called me back, and they were like, they don't care if your hair is in an afro. They want you to come into the audition. And I was like, okay. So I go to the audition, and I'm really not prepared. And my hair is in an afro, and I've come to realize that afro is beautiful now. So this was 20 years ago, when we had a hard time accepting our beauty, Black women. But I digress. So I'm in this audition, and I'm not really prepared, and I honestly could care less about the part anyway, because I'm just like, oh, this was sort of a random thing, and I'm reading, and then the casting director keeps reading, and I don't have any more pages, and I'm like, I have nothing else. Do you guys want me to go get the extra sides that I'm missing? Or it was such a laid back, and they laughed, and I was like, okay, that was a waste of time. And I ended up getting the part. And I say that because there is something that they can almost sense. It's almost spiritual. When you're desperate, it's like they don't want you. But when you're like, if you guys want me, great. If you don't, It's okay. When you lose that desperation, something magical happens, and it's like they really want you. They're like, she doesn't even care about this job. We want to hire her. Like, so I think it's important for us to find a way to let go of the desperation, trust in the universe. If you believe in a higher power, trust in that higher power that you are going to get the parts that are right for you.
Well, I think that's incredibly wise advice. There are just legions of stories of actors who just didn't care when they went into the audition, and then they got the part. And as soon as you care too much, they can smell it. They smell it on you.
Absolutely.
Well, Dana, this has just been a great joy and a real treat for me to have you on the show. For those of you out there listening, you should definitely check out Tiffany Sly Lives Here Now, and also The Voice in My Head, which is going to be released just a couple weeks from when we're doing this show. And I just want to thank you very much for coming on today. It's been great.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. I had such a good time chatting with you.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.